I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. Those are the opening lines of a poem by Joyce Kilmer that originally appeared in the August 1913 issue of Poetry magazine. You may have heard the closing lines of that poem. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. According to the first chapter of Genesis in the Bible, trees and all varieties of seed-bearing plants arrived on the scene on the third day of creation. God planted a garden in Eden with all kinds of trees beautiful to look at and good to eat. The tree of life was in the middle of the garden and also the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God put the newly created man and woman in the garden and told them that any of the trees in the garden were fine to eat, except the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from that one, God said. The moment you eat from that one, you're dead. Telling them that tree featured forbidden fruit was like putting a wet paint sign on a park bench. The couple had to snack and see for themselves. And it wasn't long before they were hiding from God among the trees of the garden, instead of enjoying their leafy splendor on their customary cool of the evening walks with God. But that's a story for another day. This morning, we're hearing about a tree planting woman from Kenya, Wangari Maathai, whose love for trees and desire for eco-justice inspired her to create Kenya's Greenbelt movement in 1977. Wangari Maathai was an environmentalist and strong-minded woman whose fierce passion for planting trees to protect the world for future generations was legendary. The first African woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize, Wangari Maathai preached the gospel of conservation wherever she went. We cannot live in peace with each other if we do not manage our environment responsibly and accountably, she said. She says she drew inspiration for her movement from the Bible. The book of Genesis came to mean much more to me than just a book on how God created. It helped me understand that the creation is how God made it possible for us to live on this planet, that we need to be very grateful for what God gave us, and we need to take care of it. God wants us to be custodians of the earth. Maathai grew up in a village at the foot of Mount Kenya. Her family was Christian, and as a child, she took to heart the spiritual beliefs of her Kikuyu ancestors who revered Mount Kenya. They considered some trees to be sacred. Once when Maathai was speaking to a church congregation, she told them, "As you leave church today, I want you to look at the trees and the green vegetation with special respect and thank them. You see a tree, you see a bush, thank them for taking care of the carbon dioxide that you breathe out." The actual process of planting a tree is almost spiritual, she said. We're almost repeating the acts of God when we plant trees. Maathai inspired the United Nations Billion Tree Campaign, launched in 2006, 2 years after she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her work to sustain the environment and ensure sustainable development in Africa. The United Nations Billion Tree Campaign was responsible for 12 billion trees planted worldwide. And now there's a goal of planting 1 trillion trees worldwide by 2030. In interviews after receiving the Nobel Prize, Maathai spoke of her motivation and her spirituality. Educated in Catholic mission schools after her family embraced Christianity, she said, The more I have understood the importance of the environment in our lives and the importance of other species to our own survival, the more I have gone to the Bible. Many of the problems in Africa of diseases, poverty, and hunger are not punishments from a loving God, but rather come from human failure to utilize properly the resources God has given us. When Wangari returned to Kenya in the late 1960s from studying in the US, she joined the National Council of Women in Kenya. Rural women spoke of not being able to find clean water or wood near their homes because trees had been cleared away to plant tea and coffee. There was no wood for fencing in the animals, and the water was filled with silt from soil erosion. She listened to their stories and came up with a plan: plant trees to heal the land. She knew she could use the spirit of pulling together to help people plant trees. She said, one person, one tree. Making a difference could be as simple as that. She planted 7 trees in downtown Nairobi. 5 died, but 2 lived. And she kept planting and encouraging others to plant, so that 2 trees that lived eventually became 52 million trees. Every time she talked to a woman about planting a tree, she told them to tell another woman. Then she traveled all over the country planting trees and teaching women how to plant trees. Some men said, women can't plant trees. Only foresters know how to do it right. The Kenyan women proved them wrong. Wangari encouraged women to plant seedlings in rows of at least 1,000 trees to form green belts that would restore to earth its cloth of green. And the Green Belt movement was born. Today, Parkview Church welcomes special guests, Sela Ayuki and Kamau and Wangari Kanuthia, as they share stories and insights into Wangari Maathai's inspiring faith-fueled activism. I invite them to come forward.
Okay. Good morning, Parkview Church. First, I want to say a big thank you to Reverend Dr. Sarah Nave for inviting us to come and share in our wings about Wangari Maathai. I think I want to start at the point where Sarah very eloquently created the intersection between truth and life. And of course, connecting to Wangari Maathai. And it's because one woman dared to just do a little, as in the video we just saw. We are here today to be a witness to that. We're not just here to be a witness to her action, we're also here to be a witness to how she started the entire world because of the 53 million trees that she planted before she passed on. One of them is right here in Sacramento. So I take a lot of pride in that. I was there when she was able to plant that tree. But just to take you back a little bit, I don't want to take so much of your time. I just wanted to share with you a little bit of my experience with Wangari Maathai's movement when I was a little girl growing in Kenya. I remember we were in school, and most of the time she was in the news, on the covers of magazines. And it was always trouble. It was a crazy woman. It was a mad woman. It was really everything negative. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry to the person out there. Sorry, Miss Anna, what I said. But what I'm trying to say is that I was part of that group of little girls that grew up during that Wangari Maathai's movement. And we were really made to understand that she was a troublemaker, that she was a rebellion. And so most of the time she was pretty much dismissed. But fast forward to today, you won't believe the movement of environmentalism in Kenya, the idea of reforestation, which is pretty much picking up the little seeds. That's something I learned from her. When the little seedlings grow, you pick them up and you grow them. And so that's really what I have to share about Wangari Maathai. And so I'll pass it on to Kamal, who's here to tell you more from a really more intimate aspect of it. So Kamal.
Good morning, church.
Good morning.
I'm just going to dovetail from what Sarah Nave just spoke about. And, my good friend Sela that I've known for about 30 years now. And by the way, just so you know, Sela is my daughter's Wangari's godmother. So, yeah. So we go way back. Now, one of the things that that come to mind is, again, as Sela was saying, we grew up back in the 70s, hearing about Wangari Maathai as a troublemaker, but later we found out she was a lot more than what she was portrayed to be, because she stood, she spoke to power with truth and with a lot of conviction. And I remember when I was in high school, she came to our school and requested that we each plant 2 trees. And the high school that I went to, there's a very busy road that goes by. And every time I drive by, I look at my I think I planted them in 1981. And right now, I think they're at least 50 feet tall. I planted 2 seedlings and they're still surviving. So every time I go to Kenya, which I go quite often, I drive by and I look at my 2 jacaranda trees. I say, oh, they're still there. So I was impacted by, Wangari Maathai's movement. But the biggest thing is to stand in the face of developers who had a lot of backing from the government. They wanted to basically hive off a part of a city park to build a hotel. I think it was the Sheraton, by the way. And another piece was they wanted to build, expensive mansions in an urban forest that we have in Kenya. And that time we had a president who was basically a dictator, and what he said, basically went through. And if you tried to oppose him, or if you contributed to the Greenbelt movement, I knew people who had contributed to the Greenbelt movement, they got into a lot of trouble for it. I remember one person gave an equivalent of about $600 to the Greenbelt movement. And a loan he had gotten to develop a piece of real estate was recalled early. So he had to come up with the money. So basically the president was trying to bankrupt this person. So those kind of tactics were going on. So when the police were coming with the bulldozers coming to hive off a part of the forest and a part of the park, Wangari Maathai and 6 other ladies went to the park and they tried to plead with the police and the bulldozers, please don't do this, don't do this. So they decided to go to a traditional way of intimidating everybody. And what they did in our culture, seeing the naked body of an older woman is one of the biggest taboos that you can ever have. So the women, 6 of them, decided to take their clothes off. And even the police just turned around and says, you know what, I'm done with this, I'm out of here. So, and that is basically the way Uhuru Park, which is in downtown Nairobi, and Karura Forest, which is in downtown, is basically just outside the city, just a little bit, one of the few urban forests. And it's both of them are very big places for people to go and sit down and take a rest. And Karura Forest is one of the big, most popular places to go hiking every weekend. And the missions like the British, Embassy in Nairobi, the American Embassy in Nairobi have supported it. I think there's an NGO called the Friends of Karura Forest. And what they do is to make sure that nobody ever touches that forest ever again. So now if nobody in the government even tries to hint at trying to touch the forest, because what happens is the fact that people will come out in droves based on the fact that they've realized the importance of having a green belt within the city itself, and also the importance of, as Dr. Nave mentioned, the idea of pollution is there, so people are realizing the importance of having fresher air. And so the trees and the forest and the open space have been a lot of help in the country. Just to summarize, and I don't want to say too much, she basically started a movement to appreciate the environment for future generations. And I remember I was living up in Seattle for a while back in around maybe the late 90s, and I got to meet her, and it was such a huge honor. I think I have a picture with her somewhere. It was like such a huge honor. The one thing I'd say, I'm not very well versed with her spiritual background or her walk with God. I really am not very well versed with that, and Dr. Nave was able to, really weave that in very well in this discussion. But one of the things that I know, she regretted having basically lost a marriage because of her work. But I think in the end, a lot more people appreciated her work and the work that benefited a lot of people and the future generations, including my daughter Wangari, who's decided to sit on her chair, will benefit from it. We're definitely very, very grateful for her work. So thank you so much for letting us come and speak about this really, really wonderful woman that we absolutely adore and we absolutely admire in Kenya. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kamal and Sela. Thank you so much. Wangari, thank you for coming. Wangari Maathai was the first woman in East Africa to earn a PhD in biology. And she began speaking out against rapid deforestation of Kenya's rich lands in the 1970s. Across 2 decades, she was at times beaten and imprisoned as she battled economic and government powers in her work, as Kamal mentioned. She was promoting eco-justice, and the powers that be wanted to create economic opportunity. The dictator that Kamal mentioned publicly called her a madwoman. And as Sela said, the press on her was terrible. She was a troublemaker, someone to be shut down. So what kept her going through all that public scorn and beatings? She attributed to being molded by people of faith, the nuns who came to Kenya to teach her in Catholic school. She was grounded in the moral fiber of wanting to do the right thing. She was convinced that even those persecuting her knew that she was doing the right thing. They knew people have a right to clean drinking water, she said, but they didn't want to admit it because it inconvenienced them. When I challenged an official, he could intimidate and ridicule me, but I had the conviction that I'm right, and he knows it. In 2006, Krista Tippett interviewed Wangari Maathai for her On Being broadcast. Of Maathai, Tippett said, she saw early what many are just beginning to grasp, that ecology is increasingly a matter of war and peace and human flourishing. During their interview, Maathai said, they wanted to clear cut this forest and put up residential homes. And I said, are you out of your mind? You need this forest. So we would take trees and march with our seedlings toward the forest and say we are marching to go and plant trees. Now we were essentially saying, you're not going to clear cut this forest because this forest is needed by the city. After many years, we won. That little forest is still there, thank God. And thanks to Wangari Maathai for bringing to pass that little forest that has become a mighty urban forest greenbelt. And doing what the prophet Isaiah said, you shall go out in joy and be led back in peace. The mountains and the hills shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Instead of the thorn shall come up the cypress. Instead of the briar shall come up the myrtle. And it shall be to the Lord a memorial for an everlasting sign that shall not be cut off. Amen.